Well, they say there's two things certain in life, death and taxes. I would like to add a third. Monday morning always comes. No matter how good or bad the weekend is, Monday morning always comes. No matter how restful, how memorable, how wonderful the vacation was, Monday morning always comes. You just have to go back to work. In today's gospel lesson, it's the New Testament version of Monday morning. The disciples have spent the better part of 3 years learning from and following Jesus. They have witnessed the tragedy of his crucifixion and experienced their own grief. They have moved from disbelief to exhilaration and joy at his resurrection. And now they're back at it, fishing in their boats on the Sea of Galilee, back to work. In this very last chapter, in this very last story, in this epilogue to John's gospel, it's time to go back to work. But on this back to work morning, this nose to the grindstone morning, something unique happens. Jesus shows up, and he gives to his disciples, and especially to Peter, two things that he deeply and necessarily needs: a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose. So let's begin with the sense of belonging. We all need to feel accepted by a larger group in order to have a stable identity and a sense of who we are. Like many people, when I was in high school, belonging was very important. I played sports, but I was never very good at it, and so I never really felt like I belonged in the locker room. But in the band room, well, that was a different story. I played the trumpet, and I played fairly well, but it wasn't my talent that led to my sense of belonging. It was the community that our band director helped to create. John, he asked us to call him John, he drummed into our developing senses of self that every person, every instrument, every part, every note was important to the whole group. He would tell us that the band was only as good as its least practiced member. And whether we had great talent or little talent, all of us had an important part in this ensemble. And he would tell us that if everybody plays up to their ability, we will be a great ensemble. And so for all of us, there was this sense of belonging to something bigger than ourselves. And so because of that, I felt like I belonged. These were my people. Belonging is significant. On Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he puts belonging just above those very basic needs of clothing and shelter and safety and food. It's basic, it's necessary. Even our identity, the psychologists tell us, are tied to our need for belonging. Our gift of identity is given to us by those around us. You see, we see ourselves through the eyes of others, through those closest to us. And when they notice us, when they affirm us, when they love us, when they have compassion and empathy for us, then we know who we are and we know that we belong. And just so we're not confused, belonging is different than fitting in. Indeed, it is exactly the opposite. Remember in junior high how important it was to fit in? And so we wore the same clothes as everyone else. We adopted the same language as everyone else. We listened to the same music as everyone else. Whatever the herd decided was right, that's what we did. Fitting in is changing yourself to be acceptable to the group. Belonging is being found acceptable for just who you are. In this scene from the gospel lesson, Jesus asks Peter 3 times if he loves him. 3 times. Imagine if someone that you care deeply about asked you 3 times in a row if they loved you. Painful. Indeed, John tells us that Peter was hurt by this repetition. Now, I suspect that only later did it finally sink into Peter that Jesus was not testing him, but Jesus was reinstating him into the community of believers. Jesus allows Peter to confess his faith the same number of times that he denied his faith the night before Jesus' crucifixion. And so Jesus is drawing Peter back into the community, a community where Peter belongs. Jesus accepts Peter for who he is, regardless of the betrayal and all the quirkiness of Peter. In addition to belonging, we need a sense of purpose. We need to know that what we do matters. That if we show up, people will notice. And if we don't show up, people will miss us. You see, purpose, as it turns out, is one of the great motivators in the world. It's more powerful than money or fame or power. Believing that we have something of value to contribute draws us again and again into challenging circumstances, and it allows us to meet those challenges with joy. So in response to each one of Peter's confessions, Jesus responds by giving him good work to do. Feed my sheep. Be a leader. Look out for these others. Devote yourself to this community. Peter is reinstated to the community of the faithful, given a sense of belonging, but then he is also given good work to do. He's given a purpose. You know what? This story is just one of hundreds in the scriptures that do the exact same thing. You see, apparently God knows what we need. Over and over and over again, God gives God's people a gift of belonging and a gift of purpose. In fact, these two themes of belonging and purpose are so dominant in the biblical story that we've given theological language to describe them. We are justified by grace through faith. That's the promise of God that accepts us for who we are, a gift of God's grace and mercy. It's a rich promise of acceptance and belonging. And our vocation, our baptismal vocation, that thing that was laid on to us when water was poured on our heads, we are called to live in this world marked as God's people with the cross of Christ. And that is the promise, that God will use us wherever we are, whoever we are, to care for God's people and for God's world. It's a promise of purpose. And so here we are, dear people of faith. Here we are with our people, gathered with the fellow baptized, gathered around the richness of God's word, reminded of our belonging in our baptism, invited to a table to share a common meal of bread and wine, the feast of Christ's death and resurrection. In this Easter season, when our voices are full of alleluias, when we rejoice that Christ's crucifixion brought life to these dry bones, and we celebrate again the hope and the promise of his resurrection, God has said to each of us and to all of us, you belong. You are mine. You belong to me and to each other. And then at the end of this service, you're going to be sent into the world. Go in peace, serve the Lord, proclaim the good news. And we will go into the world with the purpose that was laid onto us at our baptism, to proclaim Christ through word and deed, to care for others and the world God made, to work for justice and peace. See, each week we are invited into a community where we belong, and we are given a lifetime of purposeful good work to do in the name of the risen Christ. While the story is told in your individual lives, the story is told 100 times in the life of this congregation, 100 times a week. When the Inspire ladies gather on Wednesday mornings and the retired folks gather on Thursday mornings for Bible study, there is belonging and there is purpose. When the Fly students gather to deliver a welcome pack to a refugee family that just got to the United States, there is belonging and there's purpose. When the mental health team of DuPage United gathers to map out a strategy for how we collectively might more effectively serve our brothers and sisters with mental illness, there is belonging and there is purpose. When the Joyful Noise and Good News choirs, the Sanctuary Choir and the Bell Choirs gather to prepare their work of leading our Sunday morning song, there is belonging and there is purpose. In May, we will begin our first round of conversations for our year of discernment, and belonging and purpose are at the heart of those conversations. The truth is that each one of you has a place in this ministry. You belong. You are precious. You are important. These are your people. In these conversations, we will be discerning together questions of purpose. Two fundamental questions. What is God calling us to be, and what is God calling us to do? We enter into these conversations believing deeply that God has a purpose for us as the people of God in this place. Right after this gospel story comes the last sentence in John's gospel, a sentence that we did not read, but I'm going to read it for you. There are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Indeed, there are many things that Jesus did, and there are many things that Jesus continues to do. The story is not yet finished. There is no way that John could ever have imagined all the things that Jesus did. There are so very many things that Jesus continues to do through you and through us. So many that the tale of them would fill all the books in the whole world.